Hey there, baseball fans. Nathan Rohde and Shooter Hunt here with the latest episode of Coffee and Curveballs. Shooter, we got the season well underway now. Got games going on all over the country. We've got some games, because of weather, being moved different places, so our guys are moving around a lot, calling audibles, but we got lots of highlights for you today.
Yeah, coast to coast action. It's heating up in the spring season down south again, and then we got those preseason events as the northern states are about to start that high school season.
Excellent. Well, let's start bouncing around to some of those states. We start out in Florida, where we had the preseason classic. Yet again, a huge event with tons of talent. We'll get into more depth on a lot of the draft guys, actually the bigger name draft guys on the podcast. But a couple guys that I want to mention that stood out. Will Bartlett has definitely put his name into that draft conversation. Big, strong kid, 6'3", 220. Hit a missile of a home run on Tuesday that was 111 off the bat. He can't be ignored this spring. But then you got Patrick Romeri, who had two triples and a base hit, one of which came off of 94 from Joe Charles. That was an absolute rocket back up the middle,
Villanova
making a name for himself. He's committed to Villanova. And then I really enjoyed watching Kevin Melendez pitch for Central Point. Pitching in the low 80s, slurvy breaking ball, but mixed up his tempo, mixed his speeds, and he pitched against IMG, which, as you know, Shooter's a loaded lineup. Kept those guys off balance for most of the game.
Yeah, he did a great job there. I was actually following along on our Twitter live feed, which was great. Shout out to Doug Freeman for doing an awesome job with the play-by-play. But while you were there, I was getting ready for Texas. I was in Texas this past weekend in the Round Rock area, and there were a couple uncommitted arms that were really interesting and stood out. The first game that I got to see was Waco Midway, and it wasn't Will Rigney on the mound, but Logan Pace, another big right-hander, 6'4", 193 pounds, solid frame with some broad shoulders. There's a little funk in the back with the arm action, a little hooker, but he was able to pound the zone. Went complete game shutout, worked 83 to 85 on a cold morning. Brody, I had on a big parka jacket and a hat, but he pounded that zone, and he threw his slider at will. 74 to 76, dropped it in for strikes, got swings and misses, was buckling some guys. But he's another big Texan arm in that 2020 class who will have some schools on him throughout the spring and into the summer. And then another one, a real high academic kid. I heard some rumblings of a 35 ACT for Reed Gallant out of Marcus. Hopped on the mound, was 84 to 87. It's a wiry athletic frame. The ball was jumping out of the hand. Only about 6'1", 165 pounds. So there's a lot more to come on the frame. I think he's got even more velo on the way. Really good looking player.
Excellent. First thing when I saw that name, Reed, I thought of Goofus and Gallant from the Highlights magazine days. And to see that he has a 35 ACT, it's obviously he's not Goofus. But moving over to Indiana, they had a preseason event this past weekend. Obviously, games aren't quite starting up yet, but a couple of right-handers stood out for our guys in Indiana. Ryan Fender, who's a Murray State recruit, pitching at 90-91, touching 92, showing some power to a slurve. That's going to catch the attention of some Midwest scouts up there. Once again, Indiana churning out arms. But then they also had an uncommitted senior in Brian Gaffney, who was sitting in the low 90s himself, up to 93. So I think he'll have a few college recruiters showing up to his games this spring as well.
Yeah, those big arms in Indiana, I keep talking about, they come out of nowhere, and they constantly produce hard-throwing pitchers. And then for me, looking at New York, which did a 10-day stretch where they went all around the state and saw tons of players, a 2022 out of the Syracuse area, Michael Kennedy, 6 foot, 170-pound southpaw. That left-hander, the arm really works. It's loose, a little bit longer in the back, but out front it's whippy and clean. He was up to 83 and showed some really good feel for spin.
Excellent. Moving on to Georgia, where I was talking about some of the weather. A lot of rain on the East Coast really wreaked havoc on schedules the last week or so. Georgia was one of those places that was affected by it. Bunch of high school games moving from their home locations over to our facility over at Lake Point, getting on that turf, and that allows for a lot of players to be seen in one location.
Great place to
Talk
play.
about a lot more, like I said, on the podcast, but a couple of guys that stood out for our Georgia crew are Mason Barnett and Gavin Collier. Barnett came out bumping 93, also showed a hammer. settled in at 86 to 90, but cruised throughout the rest of his outing. And then Collier probably had the best game of anybody on the weekend, even though he lost. He went complete game, was 88 to 92 the entire way, pitching north and south with an effective curveball, according to Blake Davis, our state director down in Georgia. So a couple other names to watch in that Georgia crew. It's a pretty good crop down there this year for the draft. Yeah. These are just two more guys to keep an eye on. So we'll be keeping our tabs in Georgia.
Definitely.
So wrapping things up here with the Spin Zone and Bomb Squad. Shooter, Spin Zone this week, I saw a bunch of it. Brennan Malone showing that slider, only threw it a few times, but got strikeouts on 3 of the batters using it. Pretty nasty pitch. Joe Charles had a little bit of struggle with his command, but still showing that 12-6 curveball with depth.
It's filthy went on.
It certainly is. And then I saw right-hander Noah Song for Navy on Friday, and it is an absolute devastating, wipe-out, knee-buckling slider that he is
Sounds
throwing.
Like Mitch Harris.
Mitch Harris, there you go. Good one. So, but moving on to PBR Bomb Squad. Dude, we had a lot of bombs this past weekend.
Yeah, I mean, the one that I got to see, first pitch of the game, big Brett Beatty at Lake Travis High School, one of the top power bats in the 19 class. First pitch, deposited it over the right field fence. And then you got Josiah Morrissey out in SoCal, shortstop, not 1, not 2, but 3 home runs out of him.
Yeah, big weekend for home runs. Obviously, I mentioned before, Will Bartlett with his absolute missile, 111 mile an hour off the bat to left field. That got out in about half a second. But then in JUCO action, got to see Ivan Johnson just kind of sit back a little bit, wait for this changeup, flick the wrist off the top of the batter's eye in center field. Pretty easy power from him.
Wow.
Yeah. So anyway, be sure to head to prepbaseballreport.com. Got lots of content as the season is getting underway across the country. Be sure to listen to the podcast where we go in depth on a lot of draft guys, plus much more. As always, for Shooter Hunt, I'm Nathan Rohde. This was Coffee and Curveballs. And until next time, we'll see you guys at the ballpark.